So, of course, the main focus that we're going to shift to of this podcast is the COP26 UN Climate Conference. And that's coming up in Glasgow in a couple of weeks' time. So I wanted to ask all of you, why do you think this is something that the short-term rental industry should be keeping a close eye on? I think the word sustainability to some has become something of a buzzword, but not something that is truly being acted on yet. I don't know if it's something that you will agree with, but what are your thoughts on what the importance is of this upcoming climate conference? Nikki, would you like to start off on this one?
Yeah, of course it's very important. And when we look back to the Paris Agreement, there are all these commitments made, and I think I'm right that no country is actually on track to actually achieve those. So there is a lot of hype around Glasgow. You know, the eyes of the world will be on those countries that are there. I said I'm an optimist, but I am still a realist, and I'm slightly sceptical about what will actually come out of Glasgow. I think, you know, governments may make commitments again, but what they actually attach to those commitments that will actually force change is what will be interesting to see. However, I think it does give a focus on sustainability. It does start to make people think about their own carbon footprint. You know, will there be things like carbon taxes on airlines? And it will start the conversation, and the fact that it's in Europe as well, and Europe, you know, in a lot of ways is leading the way on climate change. So I'm sort of sitting on the fence at the moment about what will come out of it, but I think there should be a lot of things, and tourism declares are going to be there. Probably Bob will mention that. So it will actually, you know, shine a light on climate change and all the things that Matt said about why, you know, small vacation rentals can get involved. And I think a lot of them, I was just thinking when Matt spoke, a lot of them are actually doing something good already. They don't actually necessarily realise that and don't promote it. You know, often you go onto websites and you have to dig around to actually find the sustainability section, almost as though they're embarrassed about it. So it's going to be a really interesting time. I always have my little antennae for greenwashing, and I'm sure there'll be some of that going on. So I hand over to the other two to see what their views are.
Yeah, Bob, are you similarly optimistic but also realistic as Nikki describes? I know that COP26 is something in particular that you have highlighted very specifically on social media for probably as long as I can remember, even as far back as when we had our trends webinar for short-term rentals a whole year ago.
Absolutely. Well, I listen to a podcast called Outrage and Optimism, and the final question on that podcast every week to the guest is, if you're on this line of outrage on one end and optimistic on the other, where does that guest place themselves? And so it's really interesting to see how that occurs each week. I'm an uncontrollable optimist. I always think that things are going to be good, but I'm also a realist. And so, of course, things can turn out badly. You know, picking up on what happened in Paris in 2015, these commitments were given, and let's be clear, the commitment was to keep global warming below 2 degrees and preferably below 1.5 degrees by 2050, and to get to net zero. At the moment, emissions are still rising. Global emissions went up by 6% this year. So, you know, we haven't even got to a plateau of emissions, let alone bring them down. So luckily, obviously, we had Biden coming back, coming into power and taking us back into the Paris Agreement. Back in April, he committed the US to reduce emissions by 50% by 2030, which is the intermediate goal to reach 2050, as I was talking about before. So that's great, but we need these countries who are going to come to COP to increase their commitments, but really important to deliver on those commitments. there's no point in making a commitment if you don't deliver on them. And that applies to every country in the world. Some are doing better than others, and you could name and shame the really bad ones, and you could praise the good ones, but everybody needs to do more. So I'm hoping that what COP will produce is that there will be a recommitment to net zero, that there will be enough commitments that will get us there, and that those countries will go home and deliver on it. But I think what I'm also looking for is two things: is one, a recognition of the intergenerational differences. So of my generation, I'm the oldest person on this podcast, and it's my generation and previous generations who have been responsible for those emissions. But it's this generation and future generations who are the people who will actually suffer and who will pay the price of it. And so we need to acknowledge that. And the other thing I would want to see is the difference between the global north and the global south. We, 3 people on this podcast are all from the UK. It was the UK that started the Industrial Revolution 250 years ago. We have the biggest role to play in fixing this problem, because we've had the biggest role in making this problem. And the people in the global south, the people who are likely to be most affected by it, because they're often in low-lying countries, they're in poverty, they are the people who have had least to do with causing this problem, because they are still developing their industries, developing their technologies, and they haven't input greatly in terms of carbon output on the world. So those things I'd like to see come from COP as well. So the commitments, the delivery on those commitments, the intergenerational differences, and the issues between the global north and the global south. I would really like to see that happen, and I really hope it will. I'm sure there'll be some rocky roads on the way, but I'm optimistic, I'd like to say.
Matt, would you like to expand on what Nikki and Bob had said there?
I have a lot of doubts about governments these days. And I think events in general are good for bringing awareness. Big conventions and conferences and parades in town are important for communication, people starting to talk about stuff. So I think in that sense, it's always a good thing. But I also know the complete feeling of helplessness when you're looking at a large government institution that says it's going to do one thing and never does it. So in those instances, I tend to use the frustration and channel it towards my backyard, channel it towards something that I can control, even if it's a tiny gesture, one thing. Lately, I've been a friend of mine in the industry, Tom Powers. He invited me to his little club, which encourages you to pick up at least one piece of trash per day if you see it. And when I go out to swim each morning here in South Beach, I almost always see a piece of trash and then a couple more, and I pick them up and I put them in the trash can, and I said, okay, I feel a little bit better. And I think that sense of control, that sense of at least even tiny gestures towards the right direction, it just makes you feel a little bit better. And everybody could use a little more feeling better these days. So I use these kinds of events to propel my daily routine happening in my backyard.
And despite your doubts about maybe how quickly we're moving with these sustainability efforts, Matt, is there anything in particular that you would like to have been achieved by the end of this historic conference? Is there anything in particular that you want our industry to have maybe learned from this?
If I've learned anything, it's not that people don't want to help. It's that you've got to serve them an easy, low-hanging, fun, straightforward way to help. And if they say no to that, that's a completely different kind of person than the vast majority in the middle who really just needed that step. So I think if anything, I would like to see this as a big reminder for those in our industry. I think Tourism Declares is such a perfect example of that little step that requires almost nothing and really very welcoming in that sense. And I think it's very easy for those who are not aware of what's going on with the environment to get poo-pooed and somehow intimidated by those who may bite their heads off if they haven't been acting already. I think the Tourism Declares is that easy, low-hanging opportunity. And if everybody can get behind something simple like that, or at least more people than already are, and Bob is such a wonderful steward of this opportunity, I think that moves the needle in our own little way. And I think that's all we can ask of ourselves right now.
And Bob, you say there that you're an eternal optimist. So is there anything specific that you're looking for businesses, for operators to learn from this conference?
Well, I'm not sure they'll learn it from the conference, but what I would like them to learn is that they can be involved and that they can take action, and that it's in their interests to take action. Echoing what Matt says there, of course, you would hope that people would be altruistic and they would do it for the right reasons, because they would understand that most of them have got children, have got grandchildren, and those generations are the ones that are going to suffer the most as a result of what we're doing to the planet. Even if we keep emissions down to 1.5, they're currently at 1.1, we are still going to see some incredibly dangerous climate changes on the planet. We're seeing them already, and we're at 1.1. We're certainly going to hit 1.5. If we go beyond, it is really going to be quite apocalyptic, and that is really very worrying for those future generations. But I would also say, think of it from a business perspective, because that's, people are obviously understandably trying to focus on their business. It's been incredibly difficult this last 18 months because of the pandemic. People are understandably trying to focus on their business, be a success, make some money, put food on the table for their families. I totally get it. But I would re-emphasize that they can do all of that and be environmentally friendly as well. Because if you look at the statistics, each week something happens. Last week it was, again, I posted it on Matt's forum. Google had made some changes in terms of how you can search for flights and how you can search for hotels, and have a badge to see which were the greener ones or which were the less emitting flights. And once that becomes the norm, people are going to start to make those decisions. I always say, if you see two properties and they're exactly the same price and they've got the great same facilities, and in all ways they're just exactly what you were looking for, and one has eco-friendly attributes as well, well, why wouldn't you choose that? Who's going to be against that? It's just a no-brainer. And the stats coming out from booking.com, I follow them closely. They come out every year, and you can map the changes that take place each year and the percentage up in terms of what people are looking for in terms of environmentally friendly travel and environmentally vacation rentals or hotels. And I think the last one was 82% of people are looking to find a place to stay that is doing something for the environment. And of course, it can be some small things. I've written extensively about that, and perhaps we can put a note in the show notes about where they can find the 10-point road plan. It's on Matt Landau's community website, and any host or any vacation rental manager can take those 10 points and put them into action. It isn't in most cases going to cost them any more money, but it is going to make them more enticing to that community who are starting to look for that sort of property or that sort of accommodation. So start to make those changes, take some baby steps. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to cost you any money. It sometimes will save you money. And then you're opening yourself up to a whole market that you currently don't have access to, because somebody's going to say, well, show me your environmental credentials, and you haven't got it on your website. They're going to go, oh, well, thanks very much, but I'll choose option B because this one down the road is just like yours, but it gives me all those extras as well that I'm looking for. So it seems to me like a no-brainer, and I'm really, really encouraging people in our industry to wake up to those changes that are coming, and they're coming down the line fast. So people should get ready.
Just to hammer home that point, we did an interview with Carl Shepard, the founder of HomeAway. And it's a two-part, almost 2-hour interview, but the single most valuable piece of information I believe he shared is that niches are the future of vacation rentals, period. Niches, your ability to designate a niche and your ability to communicate that to your guests are the future of vacation rentals. You figure that out, you have a place in the future. The environment is one of the easiest, most straightforward niches to begin looking at if you don't have anything else in mind. It is the lowest hanging niche, I think. And looking at this purely from a business strategy standpoint, everything that Bob just said also happens to be a distinguishing feature of vacation rental businesses of the future. So it's going to be one of these things that you heard us saying it on this call and you keep thinking about it. And every single year you realize, why did I not do that? It's not changing anytime soon. It's picking up steam. And if you want to ride the tailwinds, you do something now to win first mover status.
I think something that excited me when I got involved in the vacation rental market is how broad it is. So, it covers household, waste, linens, food and drink, communities. There's so many different areas that you can start with. And there are areas that, as I said before, enrich the guest experience as well. So there's no reason for anybody not to start somewhere, and they can choose what resonates most with them, what they might be doing already. So I think the opportunities, and particularly for vacation rentals, the host has a much more personal connection with the guest, and that's one of the reasons why vacation rentals are growing massively in popularity, because people want to have that personal connection, and so you can take it to the next stage, and choose what excites you. I'm like very excited by organic toiletries, so the fact that I can offer these to guests and they're in refillable containers, that excites me. So it's a question of finding where the area is that you really want to make a difference in, and start with that, and then one thing leads to another.
And to my knowledge, this conference has received probably unprecedented levels of coverage. Even just us being here discussing this over a podcast, it's not something that I've seen a lot of in the lead up to other climate change events. So we're really hoping that something very tangible is going to come from this. So Nikki, I'll just start with you, because I'd love to get a little sort of final message from all of you for our listeners that you want them to take away from this podcast. So the stage is yours.
Yeah, sure. I think we probably all said this already, but we are all in this together. It's a cliche that we've heard, but people, governments, businesses, NGOs, we all have to do this together, and it's a last chance opportunity, really. And I think we have to approach it with optimism, hope, excitement. I've worked in the marketing industry for a long time, and we've used fear a lot as the motivator for people. I think we've moved away from that, and we've all seen shocking images. I think we now need to inspire people. This next decade is certainly going to be in the history books. So let's make sure it's remembered for the fact that we've restored balance to the planet. We've created a resilient and fairer world for people and the natural world, and that human beings have actually re-established themselves as an integral part of the ecosystem, and not that we're remembered for having destroyed it.
Matt?
Creativity. Creatively thinking about these things wins you an amazing new scope of opportunity, I believe. It's not necessarily going to be following an instruction manual like maybe in some other industries. For ours, it boils down to coming up with creative solutions, and the simpler, the easier, the more fun that we can make them for others to join in, the more likely that they do. And I think creative problem solving is something I learned in the historic district of Panama. We ended up creating a foundation that demobilized all 5 of the street gangs and reintegrated their members back into the community. That was not something that was had ever been done before. And that was maybe an extreme version of creativity. But I think if everybody can put on that creative hat, think outside of the box, come up with new solutions that might work, that might not, then you get that sense of control and momentum back. And I think really everyone right now wants to feel a little bit better, a little bit more in control, a little bit happier. And it does. It starts with one gesture. I once remember a dentist friend telling me that the way that he finally convinced people to floss was telling them to do it, floss one tooth each morning. And I said, that sounds silly. And he said, no, if you get them to floss one tooth, it's the first step to leading to 2 teeth. As opposed to asking someone to floss all their teeth both morning and night, he starts with 1. And I think that's important for all of us to remember. It starts with 1.
And Bob, I won't ask you to do another dentistry analogy there. What would be your defining method for this?
Yeah, well, certainly Matt is very keen on flossing. He talks about it a lot. I would re-emphasize. I think I totally get it that people don't always know where to start. They're confused about how to get into becoming more environmentally friendly in the vacation rental industry. And so what they do is they see it as complex, they see it as difficult, and so they park it. It goes to the bottom of the pile and it never gets to the top because there's always some more urgent day-to-day tasks that need to be dealt with. I totally get it. We all have that from time to time, but it's one of those topics that the longer you leave it, then the more work you're going to have to do when you get around to it. So I would really encourage people to connect with one of us, and we will help you. Connect with Tourism Declares, and that community will help you get started. There are always people at different points. There'll be people ahead of you and there'll be people behind you. There are no perfect situations here. We're all on a journey and we're all learning. So, don't feel that anybody is going to be judging you. Just put your hand up and say you want to get involved, and say, but I don't know where to start. I think I would probably finish by saying I think climate change is everybody's business, and business needs to be part of the solution to climate change. So connect and get started.
And how can people find out more about Tourism Declares, and how can they declare as well? Just finally, Bob.
Yeah, sure. They just go to tourismdeclares.com and follow the link for how to declare, or connect with me on LinkedIn, and I will help them personally.
Fantastic. So thank you very much to Bob, to Nikki, to Matt for your time today, and for everyone for tuning in. COP26 begins on Sunday the 31st of October and lasts until Friday the 12th of November. And of course, if you'd like to keep up to date with any industry news, head on over to shorttermrentals.com and sign up to our weekly e-newsletters.